In the quiet fishing village of Grey Harbor, where the salt-tinged air clung to every surface and the sea whispered ancient secrets, the legend of the widow was as old as the tides themselves. For generations, villagers spoke of her in hushed tones, warning one another to respect the rituals that kept her wrath at bay. On foggy nights, when the shoreline disappeared into a veil of gray, some claimed to see her, a ghostly figure draped in tattered black, her hollow eyes searching the waves for a husband who would never return. Erin Matthews arrived in Grey Harbor with little regard for such stories. A marine biologist with a sharp mind and a healthy skepticism, she had come to the village to study its unique aquatic life, particularly the bioluminescent algae that turned the water into a glowing canvas at night. To her, the widow was nothing more than a local myth, a story invented to explain the perils of the sea. But the villagers took her presence as an ill omen. "You shouldn't be here," warned old Marcy, the owner of the general store. "The widow doesn't like strangers, especially ones who meddle with the sea." Erin offered a polite smile, dismissing the comment. "I'm just here to observe. I won't disturb anything." Marcy's eyes narrowed. "You don't disturb her on purpose. But that doesn't mean you won't." Despite the villagers' cold reception, Erin was determined to conduct her research. She set up her equipment near the docks, taking water samples and cataloging marine species. The first few days passed without incident, save for the wary glances of fishermen and the uneasy silence that settled over the village after sunset. But on the fifth day, everything changed. It began with the boats. Early one morning, Erin found several fishing vessels adrift in the harbor, their nets shredded and their engines inexplicably dead. The fishermen, usually stoic and hardened by years at sea, were pale and shaken. "It's her," one muttered, his voice trembling. "The widow's angry." That night, the fog rolled in thicker than Erin had ever seen. It wrapped around the village like a shroud, muffling sound and obscuring sight. As she worked late in her makeshift lab, a mournful wail cut through the silence. The sound was otherworldly, a mix of grief and rage that sent a chill down her spine. She froze, her heart pounding, as the wail grew louder, seeming to come from all directions at once. Curiosity won out over fear, and Erin grabbed a flashlight, venturing toward the shore. The beam of light cut through the fog, revealing the dark outline of the widow. The ghostly figure stood at the water's edge, her black dress billowing in an unseen wind. Her face was pale and gaunt, her eyes hollow sockets that seemed to peer straight into Erin's soul. "Leave," the widow's voice echoed, as if carried on the waves themselves. "Leave or suffer." Erin stumbled backward, dropping the flashlight. When she looked up again, the figure was gone. She returned to her lab, shaken but determined to find a logical explanation. Yet the incidents continued. Fishermen vanished without a trace, their boats found days later with no sign of their crews. The villagers' fear turned to anger, and they blamed Erin for awakening the widow's wrath. "You brought this on us," shouted one man as he confronted her outside the inn. "You meddled with the sea, and now she's punishing us all." Erin's protests fell on deaf ears. Desperate for answers, she delved into the village's history, scouring old records and speaking to anyone willing to share their knowledge. The legend of the widow, she discovered, was rooted in tragedy. Her name had been Eleanor Blackthorne, the wife of a fisherman who had disappeared during a storm over a century ago. Devastated, Eleanor had spent years searching the shoreline, calling for her husband until grief drove her to madness. One foggy night, she walked into the sea and never returned. But there was more to the story. An old journal, buried in the archives of the village's tiny library, hinted at a darker truth. Eleanor's husband, Daniel, had been involved in something sinister, a secret expedition to recover an artifact from the ocean floor. The journal described the artifact as a fragment of the abyss, a thing of immense power that should never have been disturbed. The expedition had ended in disaster, with Daniel and his crew lost to the depths. Eleanor's grief, it seemed, was not the only force at play. The artifact had awakened something in the waters, a malevolent presence that demanded retribution. And now, Erin realized, her research had stirred it once more. Determined to set things right, Erin sought out the village's reclusive historian, a man named Elias Grayson. Elias was reluctant to speak at first, but Erin's persistence won him over. He revealed that the artifact was said to lie in a trench several miles offshore, guarded by the widow and the spirits of those who had perished seeking it. "If you want to end this," Elias said, "you'll need to find the artifact and return it to the sea. But be warned, the widow won't let you take it without a fight." The next morning, Aaron chartered a boat and set out for the trench, accompanied by Elias and a reluctant fisherman named Tom. The journey was treacherous, with rough seas and an oppressive fog that seemed to sap their strength. As they approached the trench, the water grew unnaturally still, its surface like glass. Shadows moved beneath the waves, and the mournful wail of the widow echoed around them. Using a submersible drone, Aaron located the artifact, a jagged, black shard that pulsed with an eerie light. As she brought it to the surface, the sea erupted in fury. The widow appeared on the boat, her hollow eyes blazing with anger. "You dare disturb it again!" she screamed, her voice shaking the air. Aaron stood her ground, holding the artifact aloft. "I'm here to end this," she said, "to return what was taken." The widow's form flickered, her rage giving way to sorrow. "It cannot be undone," she whispered. "But perhaps it can be silenced." With Elias and Tom's help, Aaron lowered the artifact back into the trench. As it disappeared into the depths, the waters calmed, and the widow's figure began to fade. Her final words lingered in the air. "Thank you. And forgive me." The villagers of Gray Harbor awoke the next morning to a strange stillness. The fog had lifted, and the sea was calm for the first time in weeks. Though the legend of the widow persisted, her wrath was no longer felt. Aaron stayed in the village for a time, helping the community rebuild and reflecting on the cost of her curiosity. But Aaron's nightmares began soon after. In her dreams, she was back on the boat, staring into the depths of the trench as shapes moved in the darkness. The widow's voice echoed in her mind. "Some secrets must remain buried, but not all will stay forgotten." One night, Aaron woke in a cold sweat, her sheets tangled and damp. She could hear the faint sound of waves lapping against the shore, though her apartment was miles from the sea. The sound grew louder, accompanied by whispers that seemed to rise and fall with the tide. She looked toward her window and froze. A faint mist had gathered outside, swirling unnaturally under the glow of the streetlight. For a moment, Aaron thought she saw the silhouette of a figure in the fog, watching her. As the months passed, Aaron's unease deepened. She began to notice strange patterns in her research. The bioluminescent algae she had studied in Gray Harbor started appearing in other locations, places where they had never been documented before. Reports of unusual weather patterns, disappearing ships, and eerie sightings along the coastlines began to surface. It was as if the widow's curse had spread, reaching far beyond Gray Harbor. Determined to uncover the truth, Aaron returned to the village, hoping Elias could provide answers. But when she arrived, she found his house abandoned, his belongings left untouched as if he had vanished overnight. The villagers were tight-lipped, their eyes filled with fear whenever she mentioned his name. Desperate, Aaron ventured back to the shoreline where she had first encountered the widow. The fog was thicker than ever, wrapping around her like a living thing. As she stood at the water's edge, the whispers returned, louder and more insistent. This time, they formed words. "Come back. Come below." Aaron's flashlight flickered, the beam cutting through the mist to reveal the faint outline of a boat bobbing in the distance. It was her boat, the one she had used to return the artifact months ago. But it shouldn't have been there. The sight sent a chill down her spine, and she realized with dawning horror that the widow's curse was not finished. The artifact had been returned, but the balance had not been restored. Gathering her courage, Aaron waded into the water, her heart pounding as the cold waves lapped at her legs. The whispers grew louder, guiding her toward the boat. As she climbed aboard, the fog closed in, swallowing the shoreline from view. She was alone, adrift in a sea of gray, with nothing but the sound of her own breath and the mournful call of the widow. The boat began to move, carried by an unseen force toward the trench. Aaron clung to the railing, her mind racing with questions. What did the widow want? Why had the curse spread? And what lay waiting in the depths? When the boat came to a stop, Aaron peered over the edge, her flashlight illuminating the dark water below. The trench yawned open like a wound in the earth, its edges lined with jagged rock. The whispers reached a crescendo, and the water began to churn. Shapes emerged from the depths, figures draped in seaweed and shadow, their hollow eyes fixed on her. They were the lost souls, the crew of Daniel Blackthorne's ill-fated expedition, and the many others who had fallen victim to the widow's curse. At the center of the trench, the artifact glowed faintly, its light pulsing like a heartbeat. Aaron realized that it was not just an object, it was alive, a fragment of something far older and more powerful than she could comprehend. And it wanted her. The spirits closed in, their mournful cries blending with the widow's wail. Aaron felt the pull of the artifact, a force that seemed to reach into her very soul. But she refused to give in. Drawing on every ounce of strength, she hurled her flashlight into the water, shattering the beam against the artifact's surface. The light flared, and the spirits recoiled, their forms dissolving into the depths. The water calmed, the whispers faded, and the fog began to lift. Aaron found herself back on the shore, the boat gone and the sea as still as glass. The widow's voice echoed one final time, soft and sorrowful. "It is done. But the sea remembers." Aaron returned to her work, but she was forever changed. She knew the curse had been silenced, but its echoes would linger in the waters of Gray Harbor and beyond. And on quiet nights, when the fog rolled in and the waves whispered against the shore, she couldn't shake the feeling that the widow was still watching, her hollow eyes searching for what had been lost, and what had yet to be found.